Okay, I put an umbrella up there for decoration. We'll just hope it won't fall down while I'm filming this. Hello everyone, my name is John, I'm the Geeky Fanboy, and welcome back to me, reviewing The Umbrella Academy. This was the first TV show I ever reviewed on this channel, and since then I've reviewed every single season, so of course it would only be the right thing to do if I now reviewed the fourth and final season of this show. I got myself a glass of iced coffee because it's 33 degrees outside. It's really hot here. So yeah, grab yourself something to drink and let's chat a bit. So as always, I'm gonna talk about the story first. There's probably going to be spoilers, just saying that right here before I forget it. And then I'm just going to talk about some of the characters in more detail, going through the siblings 1 through 7. So basically keeping the structure of all my old Umbrella Academy reviews. And yeah, that's it. Let's jump into it. Okay, some general thoughts and opinions before we jump into depths of the story and plot of this season. Overall thoughts, okay. Could have been better, but okay. I don't think I hated it as much as the majority of the internet seems to hate it. Like, my general impression is after I went online is that people hate this. And I can see why. There's certainly some stuff in this season that's unusual, to say the least. But I don't think I personally disliked it as much as other people did. Like, don't get me wrong, this is the worst season of the show. Like, I think progressively the show has gotten, slightly worse with each season, basically ultimately making season 1 my favorite, although I haven't watched it in a while. So, yeah, I went out with a mostly good feeling, even though we only had 6 episodes to take care of everything, which, just as a general note here, 6 episodes was not enough. That wouldn't be enough for any kind of show to wrap up its final season, honestly. And I don't know if it was because of Netflix cut some budget, or because of the writer's strike, or just Netflix being Netflix. 6 episodes is not enough. Give your shows more episodes so they can actually do something with the story and the characters. So yeah, we only had 6 episodes this season, which I think definitely didn't do the show any favors. Like, you can really tell that they had to wrap up some stuff real fast, that they just left out some explanations, basically didn't really talk about any of the previous stuff that happened in season 3 or even beyond that. Like, that didn't really get talked about at all. And some of the characters that receive focus this season are either things that we have sort of seen before, or those characters are not really pushed into any new territory that really changes them. There aren't really any big character challenges or developments for the large parts of the cast. And some characters, I would also argue, definitely get sidelined, even though they should be talked about a bit more. Whereas some characters receive way more focus than I would have liked. So yeah, there's definitely an imbalance here, also again due to the fact that we only have 6 episodes to really do anything. And it just doesn't do the show any favors, and you can really tell that they were basically in a hurry to now finish the story, and I can sort of understand why people now feel dissatisfied with this ending. But overall, I still think I enjoyed it a bit more than I disliked it. There wasn't a lot that I outright disliked this season. There was a lot of stuff I was very meh about, which in many cases could arguably be even worse than downright just disliking something, if it's just mediocre, just mid. But there was also some stuff that I enjoyed, which mostly had to do with the characters and the actors portraying the characters. And there was some good stuff there. Also the humor, I think this season worked really well. There wasn't really laugh out loud moments for me again in this season. And I just love hanging out with this cast, just seeing them embody these characters, just seeing this dysfunctional family hanging out, having to deal with each other, having to deal with not ending the world again. Like, I just love hanging out with them. Do they get a satisfying ending? That depends on your interpretation of the ending. Honestly, we're going to talk about it in a minute. Don't worry. But I just was glad to hang out with them and to have them, like, to see them go out at least on a like final note. Like, it's an emotional note, and even if you might dislike what happens with them at the end, if you might dislike the circumstance under which this ending happens, I still think they hit the right note there at the end with like focusing on the characters and sort of like getting you a bit emotional there. So yeah, like I like hanging out with these characters, so it was fun seeing them again. They introduced some side characters in this, which we're also going to talk about, who are mostly not that special. Honestly, like the villains also we get this season are interesting, I think, but they definitely have a lot more potential than what the show actually did with them, which we're going to talk about in a minute as well. So yeah, in terms of like just like the actual like plot as it was developing, especially in the second half, and how the villains interacted with the main cast and all that, yeah, like wasn't all that great, wasn't like super engaging. There was some secondary storylines which were questionable. But I guess that was, I mean, at least that's a choice. That's a choice. That's something the writers did that probably most of us didn't expect. And I mean, I can always appreciate at least writers trying to do something different with the characters. So since we're basically jumping into the story here already, let's talk about the overall story of this season. So we have 6 episodes to tell the final story of the Brellies, of the Umbrella Academy. And the story starts in this alternate timeline that they enter at the end of season 3 with them having lost their powers, and they do a bit of a time skip. I think they do 6 years later. And well, I'm not generally opposed to time skips. Like, it can be interesting to just like sort of see where characters then go in a different stage of their life. I'm not quite sure if I like how they dealt with having a time jump in this, because I feel like we skipped over so much character development and over character discussions that I feel like we should have seen and that we don't get to see now. And this is combined with the fact that they don't really, in general, talk about the stuff that happened in season 3. Like, not really. And I think that's a mistake, because there's a lot of heavy shit that happened at the end of season 3, especially like in regards to Allison, for example. And the characters don't get to really hash that out. Like, we don't see that. Like, we see that Klaus now lives with Allison and her daughter. We don't ever see why Klaus feels comfortable hanging out with Allison. We don't see Allison falling out with like any of the other siblings, if she's talked to any of them again. And then when they do reunite in episode 1 at the birthday party, this just gets glanced over. Like, yes, Allison feels uncomfortable being there because of what happened in season 3, but she doesn't really talk to anyone about this. Like, the only one, like, she talks to Lila, who is not one of the siblings, basically. So she's sort of the only one she can talk to. And then, like, Victor gets a scene later where he's like, hey, we're not friends. I hate what you did to us. And I don't have to like you. You don't have to like me. But we're just doing this to save the world. At least there was an acknowledgement. But apart from that, like, it really irked me when Allison came to the birthday party after 6 years. And then Luther, out of all people, awkwardly is like, oh, hi, Allison. How have you been? And I'm like, Luther, the last time, presumably, that you saw her in season 3, she SA'd you, in case you've forgotten. Allison rumored Luther into wanting her sexually, and it went very wrong. And the show never, I think, appropriately dealt with that. Now Luther's like, oh, hey, Allison, it's a bit awkward, but hey, welcome back. And I'm like, Luther, she assaulted you. This is bad. I just feel like we missed out on so much. Like Luther also, if we're already mentioning here, Luther also went through some shit at the end of season 3, like losing Sloane. And even though I didn't like that relationship all that much, it was clearly important to Luther. And now nothing. Mentions Sloane like once, I think, but doesn't grieve for her, doesn't talk about her. Like, granted, it's been 6 years, maybe he's already gone through the grieving process, but we didn't see any of that. We don't see him having any impact from losing the woman he was married to, that he presumably really, really loved. Nothing. And that sort of continues with like all these characters that we just sort of jump to them having dealt with shit that we didn't get to see, which seemed really important. Like Klaus is clean now, which, I mean, good for him. Would have been interesting to see how he got there, I guess, but no, like Victor, I think, I don't even remember, like owns a bar or something. Good for him. Like, he's very low key, he's very chill. And 5 is like just still doing his spy thing, I guess. Being an old man. And Ben is still being an asshole. Like, he was in prison for being a crypto dude. Can we talk about that Ben is a crypto dude? Like, it's a good joke. Like, it got a good chuckle out of me, but really? Ben became a crypto bro? Like, I know he was an asshole in season 3, but not that big of an asshole. So then our characters all like sort of reunite at this birthday party, and they're all like, they're basically sort of forced to be together, essentially. And then through like some contrived stuff, they eventually, well, what means contrived? They get their powers back because Ben, once again, is an asshole. Like, it was really, like, it was, obviously it was very predictable, but that they're gonna get their powers back. But like, it was such an unspectacular thing how it happened. Like, when they went out for dinner and Ben said, oh, hey, I'm gonna just pop out real quick, here are drinks. I was like, oh yeah, he probably put the marigold in that. Like, wasn't that obvious? Although I did like that Klaus at first didn't drink it because of his previous addiction problems. I did like that. That was a good detail. Then we get this whole story with Jennifer, that they need to find her, and they go drive off to this little town. The drive to this little town, funny. Like, I don't care. I know Baby Shark is a really annoying song, but I don't know, I just thought that was hilarious. It's like pretty easy joke, but I honestly laughed my ass off. I thought it was really, really fun, like just them driving for hours and hours being stuck on this bus while Baby Shark is running on the radio, and just Jago, like presumably already being like completely not fazed by it at all, because he's so used to it by now as a dad, to hearing the song all the time, and everyone just like slowly going insane by hearing that song. I thought that was really, really funny. So they all arrive at that place in that town, and I like the setting of the town. And then just like sort of splitting off, and everyone's like sort of having their little mini moments with different people around the town. Where like 5 also here discovers like the secrets of the tunnels with the different timelines, essentially, which is a storyline we'll come back to, don't worry. And Ben actually encounters the waitress, who turns out to be Jennifer. I'll talk about Jennifer probably a bit more later, but let me just say here that I did not care for Jennifer. Like, she was barely a character. She was mostly like a plot device. That's essentially what it is. Just a plot device. And then this whole town gets like shot to pieces, so we get like a cool action bit here. I think I loved seeing Luther like in action trying to protect his siblings. That was fun. Like, everyone sort of gets like a little moment to shine here as well, except for Klaus, who is very disconnected from the main plot yet again this season. And they like do their best to like smuggle Jenny out of there. Jenny then eventually ends up being like kidnapped by the 2 villains of this season, like the double Jeans, Jean and Jean, who are fine. Like, I kind of like their shtick. They're funny, they're cute. they like have an involvement with like a secret society that Five and Lila are involved with, and they talk about like the cleanse, and it's very sort of like a conspiracy theorist-ish, which was funny. And yeah, they end up kidnapping Jenny, and Jenny then gets rescued by Ben, because Ben is the only one who seems to like really want to engage with the MacGuffin, because let's be honest, that's what Jenny is, with the MacGuffin of this season, while most of the other characters are like also talking to Reginald to see if he knows anything. Like, and Reginald gives us like some, I don't know, like world building or something. They're trying to talk about who Ben is, that Ben is dangerous and all that, which is also later like the reason for why Ben died. And while Ben is saving Jenny, it's already meant to sort of like imply that, hey, there's like a connection between them, something's weird, like Ben is gonna become like a wild beast or something, which I didn't really get until the two of them are already like together off at the motel, and they have this weird attraction to one another, which was a thing they did, I guess. And all the other characters are like talking to Reginald, and Reginald sort of explains to them like some world building stuff and about Ben, about why he died, because he like decides to give them their memories back, as to how Ben was killed. It turns out Reginald actually killed Ben, which is a reveal that's all right. Like it's not anything big. It sort of feels anticlimactic, but honestly, I had expected something like that. Like I didn't expect it to be anything like really big and spectacular, because that's clearly what is implied. But like it's too on the nose. So I already expected that it would be something personal. Either one of them accidentally killed Ben and doesn't remember, or that Reginald ended up killing Ben, which is the case here. And he sort of explains that there's like this weird connection between Ben and Jenny, and that they could end up destroying the fabrics of the universe, which could lead to what Jean and Jean call the cleanse. And then the story sort of like starts splitting up into like a bunch of, like the story splits off into like a bunch of different storylines, and none of them are really like the main one. I feel like the only character who's really engaging with the main plot is Victor. Like Victor later like also hangs out with Reginald, because he tries to figure out what is happening to Ben and Jenny. And I'm like, that's the main plot. And all the other characters are like off doing their own stuff. Like, admittedly, the whole thing with Luther and Diego like hanging out at the CIA, being like goofballs and being fanboys, that is funny. That is admittedly funny, and it leads into like the CIA being in on this whole cleanse thing, and it does give us like a fun little action scene. But it takes up a bit too much space, and you're like, why are they not engaging with the main plot? Meanwhile, we're going to talk about Five and Lila in a minute, don't worry. Klaus, he's my favorite. I love this man. He's my favorite sibling. But I always feel like almost every season the writers are struggling to include him in the main plot, because like Klaus ends up being completely disconnected for like 2 or 3 episodes from the main plot, because he gets wrapped up in this whole like gang kidnapping, sexual trafficking thing, where after he received his powers back against his will, which I thought was an interesting aspect to his character, like he ends up being forced to like do ghost sexual work, I guess, against his will, to like pay off his debts to some gangsters, and he's like stuck there doing ghost shit. And yes, it's funny and I like Klaus, but what does it have to do with the main plot? Nothing. And then he gets like stuck in at the graveyard, like he's buried alive and all that. And yes, it's very it's silly and it's dramatic, but it has nothing to do with what's actually going on. Then Allison gets involved in that too, because she's trying to find out what the hell happened to him. And her daughter happens to be there as well, even though she's not really that big of a character anyway. And then Allison gets involved with that too, and has to find out what happened to Klaus and then save him, and then blah blah blah. And you're like, okay, cool. So like these two characters are completely removed from the main plot. Diego and Luther are being goofballs, hanging out somewhere else, also not really engaging with the main plot. And now Five and Lila. And Five and Lila are, especially in episode 5, off doing their own thing, traveling through the tube that gets them to different timelines, which I thought was an interesting concept. So like figuring out how these different timelines work and what happens in them. And then in episode 5, they get stuck in the tube. They basically don't find their way back. Like they get lost in the system and lose their notes that could lead them back the way they came. And they are stuck there for, I think, also 6 years, a bit more than 6 years. And in that meantime, they grow closer, they develop a really close friendship, and eventually this friendship blooms into a romance. And the two end up kissing. And that is a choice. That is certainly a choice the writers made. Now, it was a theme throughout the season at this point that Diego and Lila were having marriage problems, that Diego was like never home or felt overwhelmed with his like regular job, taking care of the kids, and Lila also like not wanting to be a mom stuck at home, like wanting to do her own thing, and both sort of being unhappy with their relationship at the point that, like, where it was during the beginning of that season. And they've been powering off Lila and Five for a while now, like also very heavily now in season 4, and then it goes full circle, I don't know, at the beginning of episode 5, where they end up being real close to one another because they think they're stuck there forever. They won't ever find a way home, so they might as well go for it. That's sort of the vibe. They might as well go for it. And I didn't like it. I also didn't massively hate it as much as everyone else seems to. Like, again, not a big fan. I'm certainly, I didn't like it. I didn't like it. It is a stupid idea. The thing is, it feels weird. And it feels weird also largely because of the actors. Like, the actor who plays Five, I think now is 20. The actress who plays Lila, I think, is 15 years older than him, like in her mid-30s. And it feels weird. Like, because we know Five from season 1 when he was like 15? I don't know. Underage. And now, and I get that he's an adult now, but then we see him like kiss Lila, who's a fully grown adult woman, bunch of years his senior, who is married to Diego. And then they end up kissing. And it just feels weird. It feels weird. It's not even that big of a problem from a writing standpoint, because I totally get this concept of like people being stuck in like a sort of time loop, or like stuck somewhere in time travel, and they're forced to like spend eternity together. And that's actually a concept of time travel I quite like, that you go through years and years of shit and then you come back and no one knows what you've been through. I actually like this as a concept from time travel. So I'm not generally opposed to this idea, but the fact that it happens between Five, who's portrayed by a man who we knew when he was underage, and who honestly also looks still kind of young, kissing this mid-30s woman who has known him also for quite a while. Just on a meta level and on a narrative level, it feels off. And I can totally understand why so many people feel so uncomfortable by this. Like, there is no denying that it feels weird. Like, that's just a fact. It feels weird seeing them do that. And I don't really understand how the writers maybe didn't anticipate that this is going to feel weird for the audience. Because it just does. Like, from a character standpoint, it's... Nah, I don't know, it's like very mid again, because again, they hinted at Diego and Lila having relationship problems, and they pair of Lila and Five, which makes sense because they both have like this history of working for a secret organization, being used by figures of authority, so they have a similar sort of mindset and similar history. I understand why they were paired off there, because they were also paired off in previous seasons as well. So I get that. I'm not opposed to that generally. And again, I sort of get this idea of like them being stuck together for so long that maybe at some point romantic feelings would develop. If only Five looked older. I don't know. I don't know really. I don't really know how else to describe it. Like again, I don't think I hate this as much as most of the internet seems to do. But it was certainly a choice that I think mostly didn't help with people and possibly enjoying the series. Like, it didn't help. I honestly don't think it helped, and I'm not quite sure what the writers were on when they came up with that, because some of them must have anticipated like the backlash or whatever you want to call it that this would create, and then they come back, and the way they decide to come back is like Lila, Five finds his old notes which described how to come back, and then Lila suddenly is like all over that, like she really wants to go back, and she's like, oh no, I got kids and I'm married and I have to take care of my children. I'm like, you have not mentioned your children once during this entire montage that's been going on for a while. Like, she doesn't talk about her children and she keeps missing them or anything. But then suddenly, with the possibility of them being able to return, she's suddenly all about, oh no, let's forget about what happened, gotta return to my children, it's really, really important. Like, she's suddenly really, really insistent on returning, which didn't really make sense from what we've seen before, especially during that episode. So yeah, they sort of decide to like kind of forget about it for now and travel back. And Diego obviously at first doesn't really know what's been going on, but eventually, of course, it is revealed that Lila cheated on him, and it was with Five, which has a real, like, fairly big and understandable negative reaction from Diego. I feel like everyone should have felt more weirded out by that, and they didn't. But at least Diego like threw off the like he got really angry, threw off the walls. I got it. It was appropriately so. And I feel like the episode, or like the story, didn't entirely deal with that. Like, Diego gets angry at Five. They get into like a fist fight literally during the finale, during episode 6. And Lila is like, she can't really decide who she loves. Like, I don't think she answers the question if she loves Five. I'm not quite sure. But it's all left sort of like vague at the end. If she cares only for Five now, if she loves both Five and Diego, if this could work out in any way, yeah, I don't know. It's sort of left hanging there. And at least like if you do introduce this kind of storyline, like see it all to the way through, like with a good conclusion. Just that's all I'm asking. Meanwhile, Victor is the only one who seems to be like really engaging with the main plot, because he mostly then towards the end hangs out with Reginald, with like this parallel version of their dad, of Reginald Hargreaves. And I always thought it was interesting seeing Reginald Hargreaves, seeing the different versions of him and seeing how people reacted to them. And I think especially with Victor, this is interesting because Victor was so neglected as a child, was never allowed to go on any of the missions because the father, like Reginald, lied to him, or suppressed his powers. So that was really interesting, and I thought it was interesting to now see this Reginald trying to build a somewhat stable kind of relationship with this version of a child of his, basically. And arguably this Reginald we see in this timeline is arguably maybe the nicest one we've seen so far, who is like willing to let Victor try to persuade Ben not to end the world, essentially, and feels really bad when he does feel like he has to take out Ben. Like, this is an interesting version of Reginald, and I wish we had seen more interactions of him with the other kids instead of just Victor. Like, we do get this one big scene where he reveals their memories and so forth, but after that it's really only Victor hanging out with Reginald, and it would have been interesting to see the other kids interact with him as well and sort of have some reactions to just like seeing their dad or a different version of their dad. So they try to, or Victor tries to stop Ben. Ben is having like this whole weird shit thing going on with Jenny, which feels, it's just a MacGuffin plot, essentially. Jenny is not really a character, and her and Ben are having a thing which is not really detailed in any way. It's really just there so we can have a big blobby CGI monster at the end. I feel like the show didn't really go into like Ben's character as much as they could have this season, especially because this isn't our Ben. This is not Ben from potential season 1. This is different Ben. This is alternate version Ben from season 3, and he's not their sibling. This gets like mentioned once or twice, but never addressed again, even though that would have been such an interesting thing to explore with this version of Ben, that he's not, strictly speaking, their sibling, their brother. And now he's sort of off trying to do his own thing, and he ends up being the reason why the world is ending yet again, and then it becomes this big blobby monster, which, let's be honest, looked god-awful. Like, what is it? And I know Netflix can't pump out, like, House of the Dragon levels of CGI, but oh my god, like, I hated looking at it. Not just because it was obviously meant to look raw, also just because the CGI looked wonky, it looked weird. Like, what the hell was that? It was on screen for so long. Like, why couldn't we have just had Ben and Jenny going crazy and attacking everyone? I don't know. Like, it looked really weird. And then, like, while Victor is sort of there at the scene already, everyone else, literally everyone else, meets up at Diego's house for like a party or something. And I'm like, is literally everyone except Victor ignoring the main plot right now? Like, what are you people doing? And then they're like, oh yeah, right, that's a thing we could do. We could help Victor. All right, that was a thing with Ben. I'm like, yeah, you should really go out there and help your brother fix this problem. and they get there, and Ben like turns to this big blobby monster. They try to fight it. Diego and Five have like their own little thing on the side, and eventually like they realize they can't really defeat this monster anyway. And they meet up like at their old house. They try to like save their families, like Lila and Diego's family and all that. And at first it looks like Lila is gonna go with them, even though she should stay with the siblings, because as like the plan is that all of the siblings will have to sacrifice themselves in order to save the world. And at first, of course, it looks like Lila is running away with the family. And then, of course, last minute she puts them all on the train to a different timeline and stays behind after all. Predictable, but at least emotional. And Lila returns to the siblings, and all the siblings realize that they are the reason why the world is ending in every single timeline, and they decide that they will have to die, and the marigold within them has to die, so the original timeline can be restored and the world doesn't end anymore. And they all like stand together in a circle in the original umbrella house, which was quite fun. And they all just wait for the blobby monster to basically get them, and then we see all of them like holding hands and saying their goodbyes to each other as they're like slowly being devoured by Ben. And say what you will, I thought it was at least emotional. Like, it's maybe not what you expected. I can also understand why some people maybe wouldn't want this. Like, this is all of them dying at the end, but honestly, I think this is an appropriate ending, and an ending we were sort of working towards, because yes, it's been hinted at that they are the reason why the world keeps ending in every timeline. They are the reason, so they have to go. They have to die so the world can stop ending. essentially. And that's what happens right there at the end, in the final scene, or almost ultimate scene. And honestly, I don't mind that as a conclusion. I don't mind that at all. Like, I think it's an appropriate thematic ending for what's been hinted at in every season. And then at the very end, after like everything is resolved and we return to the original timeline, which seems like very harmonic and idyllic, we see the flowers opening up and like a bit of marigold is coming out. So there is still this hint at, hey, maybe the siblings will be reborn anyway. Like, maybe they are doomed to do this over and over and over again, or maybe this is like going to be a different version, a good version of the siblings that will be reborn or return at some point in the future. We don't know, but there's at least this hint that they might return in some way, shape, or form. So you could take this in a positive way, where you're like, oh cool, they fixed everything, but they're dying, but they still might return someday now in the good version. Or you could see this in the more negative light and be like, oh, they didn't fix anything, they're going to be reborn anyway, the world will end yet again. So you could, I think, interpret this in different ways, which is always, I think, an interesting thing when you can put like different interpretations on an ending. I just realized I went through the entire story without even revealing who was behind it all, which I think says something. Because it turns out at the very end that the person sort of responsible for all this shit going down, trying to bring the clans about, is Reginald's wife. Was like in disguise as some other people throughout the season, and it's like quickly thrown in there at the end that she's the one responsible for all of it. And the fact that I didn't mention her during this entire discussion / recap is quite telling. She's not important. She's barely a character. She has like 2 or 3 moments in this entire season. And one of those moments is her revealing at the end that she's the one who did all of this. Like, it was dumb. Why was she the one? Like, there was not enough done with her character to justify this reveal at the end. And it was honestly, as you can tell, really forgettable. Okay, and now let's talk a bit about the characters, just like talking about some highlights here. Let's quickly talk about the villains of this season, Jean and Jean. Now, I like the energy the actors bring to these two characters. Like, it was fun seeing them. They were, like, again, to like in every season we sort of have like a couple that's like slightly weird in their villainy. So I like that this is a theme we sort of keep in every season. And I like their shtick. They were fun, but I think like many other parts of this season, underdeveloped. Like, I feel like they had a lot more potential. We could have learned a lot more about like the clans, why they're so obsessed with that, why they are the way they are, why they want to end the world, how they came to these secret meetings where Lila and Five meet them. Like, I feel like there was just like a lot more to them as villains, because they did have great chemistry, the actors, and they were like strangely intimidating during certain moments, but there was a lot more potential for them to be more interesting. And the way they are written now in season 4 is just like them being a weird couple with conspiracy theorists who want to cleanse the world, and that's it. Let's talk about the siblings, just like some overall thoughts on them. Number 1, Luther. The thing with Luther is he's always someone who I think had the potential for me to really, really like him. There was always something off about him in every season. In this season, I actually quite like him. Like, he's certainly more of a funnier, of a goofball character. Like, he's always been funny, but I think like this season really leans into him being a comedic character, which I like, because the actor is really good at portraying that. And Luther very much has like sort of this golden retriever kind of energy, that he's always like a little bit confused or too naive about something, that he's kind of cute and adorable, and you're like, aw, Luther. Like, he's that. And I think this came to the forefront really like in this season, and it was really funny seeing him. Like, he had, I think, most of the like comedic moments that I enjoyed the most this season. I wish he had taken on a bit more of the leader position again, because that was like really sort of his thing in season 1. Though I did like that he shared the spotlight with Diego occasionally, since the two of them were always fighting for like top position. So it was sort of fun seeing them work things out in this season and hanging out together. So yeah, I liked Luther this season, even though he had some moments where you could honestly tell the writing was like forgetting about some stuff. Again, him approaching Allison like that whole SA thing didn't happen in season 3. Then he completely forgot about Sloane. Like, Sloane had such a big impact on his character in season 3, and he, I think, mentions her once, maybe twice, and never again in this entire season. And it's just like the writers completely forgot about that Luther went through a lot of emotional and partly traumatic shit in season 3, and it's all forgotten by the time, like, the time skip is over and we enter season 4. I mean, yes, it's fun to see him work as like a male pole dancer, like stripper and all that. Like, yeah, that's funny. And him seeing him working like at the CIA and all that, that's really cute. But there was so much to his character that needed to be explored more. And I just feel like the writers completely forgot about that. Now, Diego, number 2. Diego is like a lot, like mostly defined, I think, by his relationship to Lila this season and his role as a father, which I think took up a lot of time, I think, in the writing, deservedly so. I think, because I always felt like the relationship between Diego and Lila was something I didn't quite, I don't know, I wasn't entirely into it. But it was interesting to see how Diego dealt with like not being a superhero anymore, now him sort of managing day-to-day life and being a dad. He had a lot of like really good fun dad energy this season, especially like on this, like I already mentioned, doing this montage with Baby Shark and all that. That was really, really funny. He has like good, strong emotional reactions to the right things, I think, especially like in regards to Lila and his worry that she's cheating on him. And of course, it's sort of ironic that he discusses those fears with Five at a time where Five doesn't have any romantic involvement with Lila, but you know, sort of like foreshadowing there. And then him being like appropriately angry at Five and Lila for doing the shit they did. So I actually think I like Diego this season. Like, I always had a bit of trouble with him in the previous season, that I sort of was missing that connection with him. But I think this season gave him like a good enough like emotional arc that I actually did care for what happened to him and his relationship. Allison, number 3. I hated Allison last season. She became my most hated character last season, and I think the show sort of forgot about that. Like all those awful, awful things she did in season 3 again. The Luther incident. And a bunch of other shit. And I feel like the characters didn't, apart from like Victor maybe, didn't appropriately react to her returning. Like there was a lot of like interesting relationship stuff between the siblings in regards to Allison that could have been addressed, but the show just didn't do. Also, some other relationships that Allison has and apparently lost over the years during the time skip didn't get addressed. She still has her kid, yes, but she wasn't married to Ray anymore. Like, Ray was seen and hinted at the end of season 3, and then it's like sort of like thrown in there in season 4 that, hey, Ray left her. And you're like, why? How? Tell me more about that. It seems like a really important part of her history, considering that, you know, she betrayed everyone so she could get her daughter and Ray back. That wasn't a thing. Then she feels again very disconnected to the main plot because she is then roped into this plot with Klaus, which is very removed from the main plot. And I just feel like there was so much potential drama, like interesting actual interpersonal character drama for Allison's character, that we just didn't get to see. We also did, like, we got some moments also with her and her daughter, which were really cute and interesting, but I wish we could have gotten more of that, and maybe her daughter could have been more of a secondary character. But Allison is just, like, sort of there, like, occasionally doing stuff. And apart from, like, her saving Klaus and all that, I don't really see why she's all that important and why the narrative seems to have forgotten about all the stuff she did in season 3. Klaus, my baby, number 4. I love Klaus. I already mentioned he's my favorite sibling. I love the actor and his like weird, charismatic energy he brings to the role. And I think Klaus is my favorite sibling despite him so often being sidelined or being removed from the main plot. And I mean, I already talked about it a couple of minutes ago. Like, he's so removed from the main plot for large parts. Like, he's there in the beginning, and then they drive to the town together, but then he gets like roped up in this whole like human trafficking, sex tarot card reading nonsense. And it has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with Ben or with the main storyline or with Reginald. Nothing. Yes, it was fun seeing his powers. It was fun that he could finally float like in the comic books and all that. That was really, really cool. But it's not doing anything for me if it's not related to the actual story. Like, I care for that bit of the show because I care for Klaus. Like, I like the actor and I like the character because he's fun. But oh god, why? Why did we need to follow the story? Why couldn't you get Klaus involved in the main plot again? I always feel like he's sort of sidelined because the writers don't really seem to know what they want to do with him. Like, why is that so difficult for them? Like, yes, it was funny, but it was also completely useless. And I just wish he had more to do, because he's a fun character. He has an interesting and traumatic backstory. Not just like his childhood, but also stuff he goes through in each season. And I feel like he's often completely disconnected from the main plot and for most of his siblings. Like, he has seemingly a good relationship with Allison, but we don't know why. Like, how come that happened? Because Allison did a lot of shit in season 3. Like, why are these two so close? Like, what happened there? It was cute seeing him with Allison's kid. Like, that was a really sweet relationship. I feel like we had more like feelings for or exploration of the friendship between Klaus and Allison's kid than we had for Klaus and any of his other siblings. And I don't understand why the writers are refusing to engage this man in the main plot. 5. Now, I basically already spoke about 5's most important story part in this season, because apart from that, he doesn't really do all that much. Like, yes, he's sarcastic. Yes, does he even drink coffee? I don't know. He's undercover. He's old. He's an old man in a man's body. And that's kind of it. Like, he travels through time, jumps around, and that's sort of it, and gives explanations as to the things that are happening. And the most impactful thing he does is basically have a relationship with his brother's wife, which felt very, very awkward, I might say. Again, I do like the general concept of that, like, because it's also a concept that has been explored before with 5. Like, he's stuck somewhere because of time travel reasons and has to spend many, many, many years, and no one knows the shit he's actually been through until he returns, and he can't really talk about it. And this time this happens again, but he actually has someone else there with him, which I think was an interesting idea. But he doesn't really... I feel like we could have had an interesting connection between, like, the 5 from season 1 who already gone through a similar thing, where he's hung out at one place for years and years and years and has been stuck there because of time travel reasons. And then he can't really... No one can really relate to him. But now this happens again, and I feel like there could have been an interesting connection there, that 5 has been through this kind of thing before. But no, like, 5 is... Because 5 is usually a really fun character, I think, but this season he feels kind of boring. Okay, let's talk about 6. Let's talk about Ben. I didn't really like Ben in season 3 because he was just an asshole. He was just like a negative asshole complaining about everything. He's basically the same in this season, but now he gets a girlfriend? Question mark? Like, his whole story is connected to Jenny. And Jenny is pointless as a person. She's barely a character. And we don't really know anything about her. And we don't really know anything about this version of Ben either, except that Ben is a crypto bro who's still an asshole and doesn't want to hang out with anyone. I already spoke about it. There was so much potential to Ben's character because this Ben is not their Ben. And I feel like there's a lot to talk about there. And the show just doesn't. it just doesn't do it. It just has Ben being pissed off the whole time, also because of that reason, because he's sort of included in the sibling group, even though those are not his siblings, and he's very angry about that. But the show doesn't really do anything with it. And then it turns out that Ben is like the reason why the world could potentially end, because he's connected to Jenny. And Jenny is so pointless. There's so many things about Jenny that are unexplained, not interesting. Like, Jenny comes out of a squid. There's an entire scene where they find a giant squid and she comes out of it. And this is never explained. Why she's there. What it means. Does it mean, because I was thinking, oh, maybe she's like this universe's version of Ben. Like that she also had tentacle powers or something like that. No, they never talk about how she got into the squid, how she's connected to the squid, if she has powers. All we get is, oh hey, there's a weird element that was invented. At the same time, another weird element was invented, and both elements are in Ben and Jenny, and if those elements ever touch, the world's gonna explode. That's it. That's the one short explanation we get in this entire season for why Ben and Jenny are gonna implode the world and why Jenny is important. She's not really a character. She's just sort of there, being a MacGuffin, essentially, who banters with Ben until they eventually, naturally, how else could it be, have some weird connection with one another. They didn't have to end up making out, if you ask me, but of course that happens. And then they morph together into a weird blob. And that's it. Like, why should I care for Jenny? She's not a person. She's barely a character. Like, who is she? She works at a cafe, and she's connected to Ben and bickers with him. That's it. That's all she is. And Ben is a crypto bro asshole who gives people their powers back because they need to have their powers back in order for this to be in the Umbrella Academy. And then that's it. And I feel like there was so much more you could have done, and they can't because we only have 6 episodes. Of course, there's not enough time to actually develop these characters and to actually develop the actual important MacGuffin person of this season, because we only have 6 episodes, because Netflix sucks. And now, at the end, number 7, we have Victor. My boy. I love Victor. Next to Klaus, Victor is my other favorite sibling of the Borellis. And I love that he seems to be the only one who really seems to care all the way through as to like the main plot, as to what happens with Ben, as to what happens to Jenny, who engages like with Reginald and all that, who really wants to figure out what the hell they can do to not make the world end, to save Ben. And I'm like, yes, thank you, Victor. You actually care for what's going on. And you can, I don't know if it's on purpose that they give Elliot Page like the sort of like biggest like emotional like moments or outbursts, because he's arguably the most famous actor on the show, but I do give him some like good like emotional outbursts, like some good emotional scenes. And I just love how you can tell he went through a lot of shit. There's some complex stuff going on with him, a lot of like underlying anger, but also he tries to like play cool, and that he just like sort of wants to live his life, doesn't really want to have anything to do with the others anymore, but he does, that he still wants to save Ben and save the world out of the goodness of his heart, because he thinks that's the right thing to do. I just love Victor. Like, I think Victor was honestly my favorite sibling in this season, was again mostly because he seems to actually care for the actual story this season wants to tell. And I mean, Elliot Page is a great actor. I like seeing him on screen, and I think he has good chemistry with everyone else on set. And it was fun seeing Victor now interact with Reginald, with this version of his father, because obviously Victor has a very complex and toxic relationship with his dad, with like his original dad. So it was fun sort of seeing them hashing stuff out, talking about things, and Victor was sort of allowed to vent out his feelings about his own dad, and now this other version of Reginald sort of weirdly also comforting him sometimes, or like telling him how it is and stuff. So that was really fun, and I honestly thought that Victor was the most interesting sibling this season. Okay, we've talked for almost an hour about this, so What else can I say here at the end? I don't think this is a bad ending, necessarily. It's not a great ending, but it's also not as terrible as some people made it out to be. Like, some people already saying, oh, this is like Game of Thrones season 8 levels of bad ending. I'm like, really? Do you remember the last season of Game of Thrones? Because this is not it. This is not that level. It really isn't. I think this is dissatisfaction with like the plot and the characters and all that is mostly due to the fact that we only have 6 episodes. Like, all the other seasons had like, I think, 10 episodes, and there's just not enough time. There was not enough time, not enough budget or whatever to actually do, I think, what the writers really, really could have done with this final season, to like really flesh out all these characters, to flesh out these relationships, to like really deal with some other shit a bit more. Like, you can really tell that not having enough episodes does hurt a show like this. But even apart from that, there are just like certain aspects to the characters and to the development of the story that just don't work. Like, stuff that should have had consequence from season 3 get completely forgotten about, not acknowledged at all. Some of the characters feel at times completely irrelevant to the main plot. Then there are certain character choices which are questionable. Some think they're good, some think they're bad. There's definitely some weird shit going on there, you can't deny that. But I also think some stuff is really good. Like, I love the chemistry between the actors. Like, they're all doing a fantastic job. We get some like interesting like little pairing offs. Whether you like them or not, that's your choice, but at least they're trying to do something a bit different. Like, there's good individual character moments, or character interaction scenes, I think. The humor, I think, as well works this season. Again, this whole baby shark bus thing, hilarious. I love this episode, like, set in the city where they're trying to find Jenny, where all of them are together. Like, I think those are usually the best moments when I know that's difficult, but when all of the siblings are hanging out together as a family, I think those scenes work quite well and are interesting to see. And the overall vibe is fun. Like, I love hanging out with these characters. I love being with them, even though not all of them always make good choices, even though not all of them always get the spotlight, but I like hanging out with them. And yes, they are stuck in a mediocre story. There are mediocre villains who had a lot more potential. And the ending is something that's going to be very hit or miss, I think. I personally didn't mind it. Like, I think that's definitely the way this story was heading anyway, with them dying. So I'm not really opposed to that. And at the end of the day, I'm glad it ends now before it like runs on for even longer, because you can definitely tell that the story needed to be done now. I usually appreciate it when shows know when to end. Like, anything that's longer than 4 or 5 seasons is questionable most of the time. So I'm glad it ended now. And yes, this is not as good as the other seasons. This is arguably the worst season of the show. But to me, still not as super terrible as to many others on the internet. It wasn't great, but it also wasn't utterly terrible. Okay, so that's it for now. I've talked for an hour about my thoughts on Umbrella Academy Season 4. What are your thoughts and opinions on this season? Were you as dissatisfied as so many other people on the internet were? Please do tell me down in the comments below what your opinions on this final season and the overall show are. I know there were a lot of controversial things going on, so I'm curious as to see what all of the other people are thinking out there. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't done already, and I'll see all of you very soon. Goodbye.